Good afternoon and welcome to the final session of the Association of State Floodplain Managers' first virtual conference. This is session J1, Local Flood Warning System in the Mapping Track. My name is David Fowler. I'm a certified flood manager and I'm also a senior project manager in the Flood Science Center for the Association of State Floodplain Managers. I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Ranjan Muttiah. He is a CFM and he works for the City of Fort Worth Stormwater Management. He is a senior professional engineer and his title of his presentation is Building Real-Time Resiliency from the City of Fort Worth's Flood Warning System. With that, Ranjan, you can take it away.
Hello, I am Ranjan Muttiah. I'm a senior professional engineer at the City of Fort Worth Stormwater Management Division, Transportation Public Works. And this is track J1, and I'm going to be speaking on the City of Fort Worth's flood warning system as an example of how we are trying to realize resiliency during real-time flood events. But first of all, let me take this opportunity to welcome you to the City of Fort Worth. I have a City of Fort Worth backdrop for this virtual conference, and hopefully you all will have an opportunity, if you haven't visited already, to get a chance to visit City of Fort Worth. And with that, let me bring up my presentation. Okay, hopefully you're seeing my slides at this point. So my titles, Building Real-Time Resiliency Through the City of Fort Worth's flood warning system. So to get this presentation started, I'm going to talk about users of this system, and the users consist of the general public. We have information made available on the web page. The Emergency Management Office uses this information to broadcast out real-time warnings through their notification system. We have flashes that are activated during real-time events, so our drivers, particularly the visitors who are not familiar with the city, are an important source of our audience for this type of data and information we collect. We have first responders that respond to the flood events. The first responders could be police, fire. We also have stormwater management field crews that barricade roads when they respond to the triggers they receive from our flood warning network. And then primarily post-flood, the data is used to look at how well the system performed in terms of the level of service. So the engineering staff is an important target audience. And then the decision makers, when there are severe events, they want to know how the system performed overall as well. So there are quite a few stakeholders and users of this information. So I thought I would start over here and kind of step through a little bit of our history next. So City of Fort Worth has been subject historically to severe events. We are not immune from flooding. What you see here are some events from the past. The top image shows flood from 1922, and then the bottom two show flood of 1949, which were, severe and catastrophic floods. And as a result of this, we have a regional type of projects undertaken. Levees were built, flood storage reservoirs were built. Our primary flood storage reservoir is Benbrook. So actually the Corps of Engineers headquartered for this region in the city of Fort Worth as a result of the 1949 flood. So we took care of the severe riverine flooding, but then we continue to have these localized floods that would have high levels of flash floods in our urban creeks. Unfortunately, we have had fatalities, and as a result of significant storms that hit city of Fort Worth in early 2000s. There was a stormwater utility created. So there was a dedicated enterprise fund created to fund stormwater related problems in city of Fort Worth. And that as a typical example of what we've tried to do is to go back to these places where there were severe events and try to come up with a full level of flood resolution to a 100-year level of service. So quite a bit of the funding and efforts were dedicated towards trying to fully resolve the flood events. But then if you look at the inventory of low water crossings, there are about 1,200, and these have various levels of hazard. About 300 of those have 100-year level of service. Another 100 have less than that, about a 10-year level of service, and then the rest 800 odd have less than 10-year level of service. So the question became how you deal with these events that were more frequent, but also posed a significant amount of threat across the city. The significant amount of the inventory were faced with frequent events, and this inventory, of course, grows as areas become urbanized. So whereas a rural type of farm to market type of road without curbs and so on would be subject to significant amount of development, then that road then suddenly becomes a high traffic area vulnerable to people facing flood risk. So we have moved towards trying to address these safety measures at these crossings because we just don't have the budget to deal with providing a 100-year level of service at all the crossings. So the safety improvements have ranged from guardrails, signage, flashes, which I'm going to be talking about, to lighting and street markings and so on. So just to provide you then a context, is this flood warning system is geared towards addressing these frequent storms, flashy events, for which we are able to, because of budget constraints, able to try to meet with safety improvements. So it's a safety measure that as we get the budget situation changes and we can convert these low water crossings into 100-year types of solutions, then obviously there'd be reduced need for some of these safety measures, including the flashes. So we also can't afford to put flashes everywhere. So it becomes a question of being judicious about the use of those flashes, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So so this real-time flooding then in Fort Worth got started around 2000, about the time the city faced some severe events that led to the stormwater utility. So we started off with some test flashes, had a bond program dedicated towards purchase of flashes. And then we received grants from the Texas Department of Transportation to place additional flashes. So the total inventory came to about 50 plus flashes. And then as we realized, we also needed to look at a citywide type of flood warning system. We incorporated dedicated weather stations, primarily focused on capturing the rainfall that made its way through the city. We have faced not so much with kind of the hurricane types of weathers. We have faced quite a bit with frontal systems. So rain just comes, dumps a lot, and then moves on. So so that's the type of phenomena we're trying to capture with this weather network. So here's an example of just the flasher network. Obviously, these were located at places where we've had significant rescues. Unfortunately, in some cases, even places where we have had fatalities. So being where we are, even with the flashes on the road, there's no guarantee that the drivers themselves are going to pay attention necessarily to the flashes. And we've had incidences where we've had people just drive through the flashes and get stuck in the flood. So there's a limited, even with the flashes, there is a limited benefit if people don't pay attention to actually following the rules of turning around when they see the flashes flashing. So I just wanted to give you a description of the flasher system or the flood warning system. If you bring your attention to the bottom of the screen, this is just a cartoon depiction of what a field location looks like. We have a master that collects the water level at a stream crossing. The data is collected through a pressure transducer, typically. And the pressure transducer data is then collected in a data logger, transmitted out from the master when the water exceeds a overtop condition to the flashes. And then the master's information and the flasher's information is broadcast via radio and picked up by antennas located at two locations. One is a primary receive station, so I'm focused here on the upper part of the screen. The primary location we use is Burnett Plaza at 550 feet plus the antenna height. And then we have a secondary receive site at Bridge Street, which is at about 215 odd feet. And we use a local server software called Contrail to ingest that information. And so the information is stored locally as well as sent out to a cloud server. Just as a disclaimer, I want to say that any brand names I mentioned doesn't mean it's necessarily endorsed. It just means that we have gone through a bid process to acquire the software or the hardware. So don't take it as an endorsement necessarily. So I just wanted to catch up again on that, the study that was done by the Center for Adaptive Collaborating and Sensing, CASA. This is based out of UMass, and they actually also help run a system of local radar, which I will again touch on briefly. But they found essentially that there's no guarantee just because you have flashes that people are going to follow the signage and the flashes that they see. So all that then led us to not only looking at the localized type of protection we can try to provide, but also trying to look citywide and reach a larger audience, not just the drivers, but also the population at large. And then maybe if they pay attention to the weather, maybe pay attention to areas that have flooded, they can plan ahead and avoid those areas. So that provides a little bit of the motivation behind trying to go citywide to get that information out. And so as we looked at the network in which we collect weather data, we found that there were holes in the south, southwest portions, and most of our frontal systems come from the west, northwest. And then more recently, the storm we had just a couple of weeks ago actually came from the south. So we went about fixing these holes with the weather network that we got funded from the Texas Water Development Board, and we installed in 2018. So here's some pictures of what this weather station looked like. The weather stations have a multi-parameter sensor from Vicella that measures most of the weather parameters, but it's also got a acoustic sensor that measures the raindrop sound on a steel plate. And we have a traditional tipping bucket. And the controller cabinet in here has a Campbell Scientific Data Logger and Blue Water Design transmitter and encoder. And the telemetry that was used here is Alert 2. So that's one of the more recent telemetry that the weather and flood warning community has designed, and that comes through the National Hydrologic Warning Council. If you look at the picture here on the right side, you can see a radar system that is part of the CASA radar. These are low footprint radar systems that go up to like 40 kilometers and provide a more denser network of radar systems. So here's an example of the CASA radar for a recent event. It captures the atmospheric phenomena, in the low atmospheric areas. So it can kind of pick up areas that NexRad can't pick up because of the curvature of the Earth. And then it's also got a faster scan time and also a smaller resolution radar echo. So it's able to pick up some of the details that maybe NexRad can't pick up all that easily. So here's that network. There are 8 radar footprints. And of course, the more overlap you have, of course, the better the definition, because you have more than one radar covering a storm front. So this has been proven to be pretty useful for providing rain and storm-related information occasionally at least I use it also to track the wind fields, and I'm sure the National Weather Service also keeps up with some of the phenomena that they can't pick up all that easily with NexRad through this CASA radar. So I wanted to kind of structure the rest of my presentation in terms of three main attributes that I think a flood warning system needs to have. It needs to be reliable, it needs to be resilient, and it needs to be relevant. So the components, so the reliability particularly cut across all these components, and the components, as I just described, are housed in cabinets. There is a pole assembly. All of that needs to be reliable. So the weather monitoring itself has to take place in a place where you can reliably believe the measurements. So for our weather system with those 21 stations, we located places as much as possible in open space, within parks, within fenced-off areas of the water department, just the water treatment areas. And we also collaborated with our neighboring cities to locate similar such places. So reliability of sensors is critical for such a network. And here's an example of where we are able to realize some level of reliability by having two different ways of measuring rainfall. One is through the traditional tipping bucket, and then the other one is through the Vaisala acoustic sensor, which measures the raindrop impact sounds on the steel plate. And here's an example of where we are able to track the events pretty well on both systems. So it's just a way of having backup information to check one against the other. Now, they don't necessarily agree in quantity. So we actually believe the tipping bucket more than we do the Vaisala sensor, based on our experience. But it provides a way of tracking to make sure that the tipping bucket is actually functioning properly. Here's an example of where we are able to detect clogging. So these tipping buckets are subject to significant amount of clogging, primarily bird poo. So you can see here on between May 22nd and May 24th, we find the dragging of the tipping bucket. So the tipping bucket is the one here in yellow, and actually burnt orange, I guess. And you can see it's dragging and not following exactly like we saw earlier the Vaisala unit. So the black one is the Vaisala unit. You see the crisp, sharp lines during the intense period. So you can see, our rain tipping bucket is starting to clog and lag. So this is a quick way of trying to figure out where we are likely to have problems with rain gauging. Again, reliability of sensors. So how do we check for the reliability of water level measurement? So in the case of water level, we primarily measure the water level with a pressure transducer shown here on the right. This is a Keller pressure transducer. And to back up and check on that, we use a float switch just to check whether the water level is rising. Again, two separate ways of measuring the water level. In this case, it's just a trigger. So when you think about reliability of sensors, we have come to the conclusion that the sensors should use two different types of mechanisms to measure the same phenomena. May not work all the time. And I have an example in a railroad underpass where we've unfortunately, because of the difficulty of locating a float switch, had to use two PT units. So this is all kind of the new development. Some of the old network actually just still uses one PT sensor. So as we go forward, we are going to be replacing PTs with an additional check on the water level to provide more reliability. Here's an example of how the float switch in blue followed along and triggered as the water level rose in a detention pond in our flood warning system. So this is a detention pond that actually provides flood warning for the local community, the local neighborhood. An example of where the PT sensor is subject to fluctuation, and actually in this case a trigger showing that maybe even there's a fake water over top due to just heating from the sunlight. So we went back in and then put reflective paint on the conduit, and you can see it's reduced, but there's no, it hasn't completely abated. The peak here on the extreme right is actually a R2 event. And then we also use traffic cameras in certain locations to provide a visual check. So we're looking at incorporating traffic cameras as an additional final check. Our field operations guys really like to be able to visualize the location. So we think there's a value for traffic cameras as well. There's also the question of reliability of the network. Your receive sites are your brains where the data comes in. And so we believe we have achieved the higher level of reliability by moving to Alert 2, because the old Alert network did not have a timed relay transmission slot for every station. So the data comes in when it's broadcast, and then the receiver knows what to expect. So that's kind of the rough idea of this Alert 2. The new network, the new weather station network, is on Alert 2, and the newer high water warning sites, the flasher locations, which we are converting over as we go along, is also going to go on Alert 2. So this Alert 2, in case you're not too familiar with it, has a frame over which a particular site is revisited. So in this case, the frame consists of 60 seconds, 1 minute, and then within that minute, the individual locations have a chance to transmit before you go back to that same location again. And that frame is divided up into slot lengths. And in the case of our design, our transmitters can get everything together, package everything, and transmit out in 250 milliseconds. So that's what this TDMA diagram is showing. And at the bottom right, you see the different slots assigned to the different weather stations, as well as the flasher sites which will come on board. So given that we use Contrail, we've also been able to quickly look at the transmissions, the data coming in, and then when you see the band width, so to speak, start showing odd behavior. In this case, we were getting lots of messages on one of the frequencies, 169.4625, and then even the other frequencies. So we have 2 alert frequencies we are using currently. And then as we transition over, those will be the kind of decay or remove from the network those frequencies. But so we were able to look at it quickly and try to investigate. And then in alert, it does have one advantage is you can kind of look at the alert counts to try to figure out where those errors are coming from. So that's what this diagram is showing. You can see the errant 171s on your right peaking up, whereas your 169s were also, there was a little bit of peak, but not as much as the 171s. So it turned out that the 171 frequency had a master controller that was just broadcasting, rapid fire broadcasting, because it had just malfunctioned. But the difficulty was locating which one it was. So we had to use directional finds. We had to drive around with an antenna to figure that out. 169.465 was a little bit easier because we could go and look at the individual station data coming in. And we found that the wind sensor was out of whack. And this is what it looks like after we clean that up. So just a final thought on this reliability issue before I move on from that is that your reliability of the field sites very much depend on the level of maintenance you're able to do at the locations. You've got to be able to identify the symptoms, identify the history. You've got to perform the proper tests for the equipment. And then also you need to monitor the sites, the data coming in following your visit. Let me move on to resiliency, and I'll try to, unfortunately, catch up because I'm going to be running out of time here. So we do have a failover system. So in alert, it's not as straightforward as alert 2. In alert, you will have to physically change the port configuration in your local server, whereas in alert 2, because you have timing, it can seamlessly fail over from the primary, let's say the lightning strikes the primary receive site. It can fail over to the secondary receive site. And the IP feeds are also independent. So if the IP feeds to the cloud server go down, we can still access it locally. Now, if the IP feed leaving the city itself goes out from either the primary or secondary receive site, we're out of luck, and we'll have to use a field decoder to see what's going on. So then there are also resiliency issues with the sites themselves. And here are some of the questions that come up. Can the vehicles turn around when they see it? Can we integrate with additional warning systems before drivers gets to the low water crossing? And we are looking at integrating through a dry switch on our controller box to control traffic lights prior to the entry of the drivers to those low water crossings. And then Office of Emergency Management has also got a system now in place to notify people on their cell phones about flooding. It's being fine-tuned where we can reach out to people just as they approach a particular location, but that's a work in progress still. So the next issue is relevancy. So that's my third point of organization of my presentation. First was reliability. The second was resiliency, and then the third one is relevancy. And relevancy is actually probably the most important topic because it deals with getting the information out in the proper time, in the proper way. So you've got a lot of communication issues. And I'll just kind of give you an example of how we are able to do that currently. So here's the response associated with the information generated from our system. So the information goes out to the Office of Emergency Management. They provide early weather forecasts. And then during the event itself, we have automated alarms that are sent as emails to the Office of Emergency Management, as well as our field response units, police and fire, and so on. So then when the water levels start rising, alarms are issued at particular thresholds of the water level. So 2 feet below, 1 foot below, half a foot, and then if it overtops, they get another email alarm. So crews prefer to get email alarms. Sometimes there's online communication when there are events taking place, but typically it's by email. And then these alarms have a default time over which they are effective. And then if the condition prevails, that the alarm will go out again. And then if there's an overtop, then the flashes will turn on. And then when the water recedes, the flashes will turn off. During or prior to the overtop event, field crews will go and barricade the low water crossing. So here's an example of how our information is made available to the public. This is Lebo Creek with several crossings which have been instrumented. This is the May storm that hit us May 16th. And you can see the different levels of the water level here. You see the none in between the caution because there was a project done over here to provide a higher level of service at that crossing. We've organized the information through dashboards. So the field crews have different responsibilities by quadrant. So that's made available in this dashboard. Here's an example of the email that's sent out to our field crews. I just want to alert you to this additional bit of information we provide based on some experience. Is for them to visit not just the low water crossing itself, but also additional places close by that they can go check on, either en route or following immediate barricade of the location that they went to. We also collect the information post-event and generate maps like this. The backdrop over there is generated from the CASA radar. We used to use the weather stations themselves to generate a contour map, but now because we have the radar system, we provide that provides a continuous field of measurement. Of course, it's not an exact match with what we would find with an actual measurement, but it does provide the continuous field. And then we also use the actual gauges themselves to figure out what type of event took place. Again, this is all related to relevancy. The good data, the better data you collect, the more you can kind of diagnose your system and then move towards a more data-driven maintenance of the system. In this case, I have just shown the battery levels, very critical. And so if we see a battery that's showing some level below 100%, we know there's something going on. Relevancy also is associated with keeping maintenance records. So you can go back to the same place and see what transpired in terms of your maintenance activity. And we are using ViewWorks, and this is a work in progress. We don't have this ready to go yet. But as we upgrade our system, we'll be putting all the information in ViewWorks. So ViewWorks can go from GIS to a a database, as well as vice versa. Related to relevancy again is using the data we have collected to make forecasts ahead of time. So that's an area we are trying to move into in the future. So I want to kind of get closer to the end of my presentation. And here are some ideas on how you could measure the effectiveness of your flood warning system. You need to have some way of measuring how well you're doing. Here are some ideas. So obviously, the level of incidents, we don't have a flood warning system everywhere. We've made attempts to go citywide with a higher level of information availability through our public web page, notification, and so on. So there are ways through the number of incidents, maybe to see whether there's improvement in the reduced number of incidents from the time we have made these improvements. Again, this could be a whole presentation by itself, so I'm just going to just provide the main points. And then, you just get metrics like, how often people visit your website during an event, even not during an event, how they access, just keep up with events when there are, whether they just keep up with, your web page. And then even from our field crews, they go out there, deploy, and we try to keep those, the complaints from them in terms of not getting bad information to as few as possible. This becomes particularly a concern when we're troubleshooting or maintaining our system. Sometimes they'll just get an email because we didn't turn something off. So that's an example of where we get a complaint from them saying that they got a bad email. So I'm sure if you have a flood warning system yourself, you may have other ideas, but these are some ideas that came to my mind in terms of how we can keep track of improvements and effectiveness of our system. And then we also try to integrate our flood warning into our flood response exercises. We put together, kind of use the flood warning system as a launch pad to put together a flood response plan that encapsulates all the types of responses associated with flooding in the city of Fort Worth. And we have broken these into 4 major blocks: riverine flooding, flash floods, regional dam flooding. So here are the different types of flood threats. And then the 4th one that we have is the city dams. So I want to conclude my presentation by saying thank you for being my audience. I hope I was able to provide help in your flood warning system, or if you're considering a flood warning system, to provide assistance for those real-time flooding events. Perhaps your city has many of the low water crossings that can't be afforded with 100-year level of service all the time, and so you want to have a system in place to provide that level of safety as much as possible. So I encourage you to visit the city's flood warning webpage. And then a good place to get information on flood warning is the National Hydrologic Warning Council webpage. They have a meeting coming up next year, middle of June next year, I believe. So hopefully you get a chance to attend. And then with that, thank you for attending my presentation, and I guess I will see you in the question and answer session. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Ranjan, for that presentation. Due to time constraints, we will not have time for a question and answer session, but Ranjan left his email address in the chat, so if you have questions for him, you can send them directly to him at his office. Our second speaker in this session, sponsored by LB Foster, is Ataul Hannan. He is also a CFM from the Harris County Flood Control District. He is the director of the planning division, and the title of his presentation is Near Real-Time Mapping Possible in 30 Minutes for 1,200 Miles in Harris County because of Model and Map Management M3 System. Take it away, Ataul.
Good afternoon. I'm Ataul Hannan with Harris County Flood Control District. Today I'm going to present our near real-time mapping system, which maps 1,200 miles of channel in 30 minutes. This was possible because of our another program, which was started back in 2010, known as the Model and Map Management System, M3, which keeps the model up to date. This slide shows the location of Harris County with respect to the state of Texas. Harris County is around 1,800 square miles. Before we start talking about the tool, I like to note a couple of things. The success of a tool or a software or a solution depends on two things. First, knowing the limitation and assumption of the tool or software. Second, we need to know the environment where we are using it. So let's first know the environment of Harris County. If you look at the topo, Harris County is very flat. We have some relief on the northwestern side. The type of soil is clay. And we have 1.6 million structures, of which 62% were built before '89. So if you look at the infrastructure, that infrastructure has level of service less than 5 years. When we look from the elevation standpoint, more than 50% of Harris County is below sea level in 75. So up to 1/3 of Harris County, which is, Gulf of Mexico, close to Gulf of Mexico, this 1/3 is subject to coastal flooding. We have 1,200 miles of natural channel. And if we consider the man-made part, which started from 1900, we have 2,500 miles of channel. So under the jurisdiction of Harris County Flood Control, we maintain 2,500 miles of channel. So we have 22 watersheds, which are shown in various colors. Some of the watersheds go outside the boundary of Harris County, but when we are analyzing the hydrology, we consider the whole watershed. Out of the 2,500, 1,200 are mapped channel. If we consider the road network, many of them are crossing the bayou. So we like to have a system where we can consider the head loss of those structures correctly. Because if we are off by a foot, since it is a flat terrain, we're going to miss a big part of the flooding or flooded area, and which will not give our people the information about risk properly. Any event when it happens, like for example, we are looking at Harvey, we find out that 68% of the flooding is happening outside of the floodplain. And there is a natural tendency to say the map is wrong, let's remap again. But we need to remember a couple of things. Only 1,200 out of the 2,500 are mapped. So more than 50% are not met. Second, all risk like sheet flow, because of the infrastructure, as I just described, the water cannot get to the bayou because most of them has less than 5-year level of service. So the ponding, the sheet flow, and the phenomena, because the floodplain that we know of in most of the part of the United States, water is coming out of the bayou and flooding, but we don't see the scenario how water is going to the bayou. So in our Map Next program, if you go to our maapnext.org, we are trying to cover those gap in risk and trying to have a product where all risks are shown. Now, another issue which we are addressing in the near real time is all this 100-year map has a designed rainfall. Like for in Harris County, if it rains from 12.5 to 13.5 inch of rainfall in 24 hours, that is considered a 100-year event. But if that rainfall, like 8 to 9 inch, happens in 6 hours, it is also considered a 100-year. Or if it rains 10 inch in 12 hours, it is equivalent to that 100-year rainfall, which our regular map doesn't show. So I'm trying to explain with the help of heat map that, because most of the heat map that I'm going to talk here is 6 hours or 12 hours, not 24. So if we consider those, like this is the scenario of Memorial Flood of 2015. If you look at the heat map, this is the area where it is above 100-year event. And this is the area where we have around 100-year flood, but not anywhere else. So again, it is localized. And if we consider the intense rainfall, we might have more, 100 and 500 year, depending on the intensity of rain. This is 1 week before Halloween of 2015. You can see if we look at the heat map, here we might have 25 year. This is also another 25 year, but the last is less than 25. This is the Halloween of 2015. So you can see here, if we look from the heat map point of view, we have 100-year flooding up here, but not on the other side of Harris County. If we look at the tax day, 2016, the western part has 100-year rainfall, but not on the eastern side. If you look at Harvey, this is the only time, we have uniform rainfall, heavy rainfall all over Harris County. So I always say, calibrating Harvey is easy because we have a model rainfall all over Harris County. Now, in terms of our flood inundation mapping tool, we came with this objective around 2015. So what is the objective? To implement a system to automatically generate flood inundation map using the information that we get from our Gage system to develop near real-time mapping. So we want to do it countywide. We have 177 gauges, and those gauges are located in 52 streams. And we want to simulate within 15 minutes. So I say those objectives we decided in 2015, but our story of trying to develop a near real-time system started in 2007. So I was the PM and we were working with the consultant. So our test pilot project was on 2 watersheds, White Oak and Buffalo. Those of you who know our bayous, White Oak is a well-drained system and Buffalo is a poor drained system. So the way we wanted to develop it, we were using next rate rainfall calibrated to our gauges. Then we are feeding that information to HMS to come up with the flows at various locations. Then we are feeding it to HGRAS to know elevation at various places, and we are developing the map. So rainfall, we are feeding every 15 minutes, and our computational time was from 11 to 14 because every 15 minutes we are running it. We were using next-rate rainfall, view associate, we're providing us, and this is the dashboard, customized dashboard that we developed for Harris County. So if you look at it, I mean, there is various ways of looking at the next-rate rainfall coming. But one thing we developed, if you look at, when you were looking at the screen on the right side, when the clouds are coming, we are also trying to develop a threat of 1% flood on various watersheds. So in order to achieve that, we developed a network of 1D unsteady model for White Oak and Buffalo, and we were able to develop a very stable channel, a stable model to achieve those. We were able to able to come up with what we wanted in terms of product output. But when we were testing it for various events, so we were coming up with elevation from the model and then trying to see how close we are with the gauges. If you look at them, green color is less than a foot. But in many places, we were not able to be even close to a foot. We were off 2 to 3 feet. And that was the case in many of our test runs. So we decided, so we started 2007, 2000, end of 11 and 12, beginning of 12, we decided that we cannot proceed with this idea with other watershed. So we thought, let's stop it here and try to think a little bit to come up with a better idea, because this will not achieve what we want to achieve in terms of near real-time mapping. So we said at the beginning that the model management system actually helped us to achieve what we achieved as of today. So this story, the model management, I was actually hired for flood control to develop the model management system. So we had our tropical storm back in 2001. After the tropical storm Allison, we wanted to have a better model for all over Harris County. So Harris County and FEMA invested money to come up with the model system, which came out in 2007. So we had, for the 22 watersheds, same LiDAR system, same HMS, same HGRAS version model. And when the model came out in 2007, we said, hey, we need to do model management to protect our investment and also to keep the model current and accurate for our community and also FEMA. And it is a good investment for Harris County, because we do a lot of flood reduction project, which will save us money if we have better information. So flood control is not any floodplain managers in Harris County. Those 34 communities are the floodplain managers, and FEMA obviously is the owner of the map. So the main purpose of flood management, of model management system, is to have one place and have everyone, even though they might have different purpose of using the model, but they should be using the same model set. That was the main purpose. So the goal of model management was to continuously manage and maintain the integrity of the effective model, because only LOMARS will change, foster partnership between the floodplain managers and FEMA, and facilitate so people can download those models very quickly. So in order to have a nice system, we need to have a system how to do it. So we came up with the model and map standards. So if you put 3 engineers, you might have 5 answers. So we decided, no, we will pick the best and we will all follow that. So that's how we came up with the model standard and also the mapping standards. So as you all know, Harris County is a no adverse impact. So they do impact analysis. So when they're using the same model, the current model, and making sure that whatever they're permitting to develop will have no rise in water surface elevation and also no increase in CFS, not even 1 CFS in terms of hydrology. When those projects that needs LOMAR or CLOMAR, they will have local review with those modeling and mapping standard. And once they are approved by us, those floodplain managers, administrator will sign the MT2 form and it will go for FEMA review. And we are also a LOMA delegation for Harris County. So the way we are doing model management in a nutshell is all LOMARs and CLOMARs are being updated here. And when it comes to watershed, like if we see so many LOMARs has been done, there are some topo change, at that time we will cover it by watershed-wide update. And also if you look at it, we started the near real time with the help of model management. Now with this watershed update, what we are doing when we are calibrating an event or looking at an event that this watershed is off because of that, we are going to fix that in watershed-wide update. So it is kind of a loop. Model management helped near real time. Now near real time is helping model management. And M3 is actually like a file cabinet where all this updated model and GIS file resides. Now, a little bit recap. We have 1,200 miles of models, and it is always kept up to date. We have 177 gauge system, which is provided every 2 minutes, the elevation. So better understand the ability of current models. So this model management, this near real time is actually helping us as more events are coming. It's keeping us up to date how those models are reacting. Number 2, this near real time is also helping with the projects that we put on the ground. What is the benefit of those projects when an event is happening? We can also do benefit analysis by using the near real time models. For example, we map the pre and post condition, and we know the finished floor elevation, and we can see if we have not done that project, how many structure would have benefited. So by doing the structure, how many structure got the benefit, we can find out by this system too. So again, back to the objective. This is how was the story that we learned a lot of stuff and came up with this idea of doing the flood inundation mapping tool. So again, we have 177 gauge location. So every 2 minutes we are getting the feedback. So previously we did modeling and tried to match. So during that time, we found out that we have the models. If we can on the fly, because gauge is what is happening at that time, if we can on the fly calibrate with the gauge elevation, then we can map that one and have a accurate answer. So what we did, every 2 minutes we are getting the gauge elevation. We are going and running the model and on the fly calibrating and creating a profile. So our is a continuous system. This is a gauge, this is a gauge, we are creating the profile of the whole river system and then mapping it. It's not like, it's not like discrete, it's continuous system of the 1200 miles. So the flow chart is, we get the gauge, it brings it back, checks with the previous time, 10 minutes ago elevation. If there is no change, the system goes into sleeping mode. If there is a change, then it goes to map. But there is another condition, because it's 1200 miles, every place it goes and checks a threshold. Like when it goes out of the bank, that's the time it starts mapping. And there is another condition up there, because there is many tiles. So if it doesn't change more than half a foot, it will not map. But if it goes more than half a foot, it will map and display. And from our lesson learned from 2007, we wanted to make the system simple and flexible, because we know that we have to, as we learn more, we have to make more changes. So we develop the system very flexible. And there is a limitation to the flood mapping, is as far as your cross-section go, that's where the system can see, and the flood mapping is extended to that. But remember, it's only maps where we have a model and we have a gate, and it's only mapping how water is coming up the bayou and flooding it. So this system that we developed, actually 3 persons, me, then I have another person, he is a hydrology, he is a hydraulic engineer, but also expert in Python. And then I have another person who is a web designer. So these are the 3 persons develop this FIMT system. So we looked at various pixel size, 25, 25, 50, 50, but we know on the fly we have to do the mapping. So we selected 5 into 5 pixel for this system. So if you go to our website, and if you click flood warning system, so if you currently, there is no rain, so it will not show you anything. So current system, no rain, so no flow, no inundation map. But if you go to historical and put a date, like 8/29/2017, which is a Harvey. So now this system, any event that happened from 2015, you can go and see the condition of mapping at various times. So how it works, if you open it, then it clicks inundation, because obviously at that time inundation was happening. So let me explain a little bit. So on the left, you are seeing 8/29/2017. So this is the condition at 2:30 p.m. So how it remembers every 30 minutes, the condition of the past has been recorded. So if I type 8/29/2017, 3:10, it will actually show you the 3 o'clock scenario. So red means the status of the bayou, it went outside of the bank. That's why inundation mapping is happening. Yellow represent it's just near to the bank, and green is it's contained. So that's why you are not seeing any inundation mapping. This is the video of the event Harvey. So all 4 or 5 days we are capturing how we do it. So we launched this in 1st June of 2018, but Harvey was our first test with the system. We started back in 2016 and took us 1.5 years to come up with the system. And this was just an internal effort between 3 of us. If you want to zoom more into the 610 loop, this is how you are seeing how the system maps. If we collect all the maximum inundation of various places, then this is how the flooding map will look like for Harvey. Again, remember, it's only map where we have a model, which is 1200 miles, and it only maps where we have the gauge system. We're actually thinking of advancing this And we'll see in future, but we are also, within a year, we are also coming with the forecasting map. We are working on that. Anytime an event happens, we go and validate our result. We like to see, how we did. So if you look at, again, these are also timing, 6/20/2018 at 2 p.m. We went to that site and took pictures, and then we are comparing with our inundation mapping. This is another scenario. We are going to the site and checking. So every time we go and we validate how our mapping is doing, we improve our system, and we run the next event and see how it is doing. So in a nutshell, what it is doing, it is giving us a very good picture how our model that we have are performing in a real life. And based on that, we go back and update and watershed, or future try to have a timeline when we need to update that watershed. So we started the near real-time mapping with the help of the model management, because we have the updated system. Now, actually, this near real-time is making our model management system much better, because now anytime a model event happen, we are calibrating our models. So you see, one is helping other, and it's kind of looping system. And another thing, we are working, as I said, on the forecasting. So in future, you will see a lot of development coming, and we like to share what we have achieved, and to share with others and learn from others. So thank you very much. With that, I'd like to end my talk.
Thank you, Ataul, for that presentation. And we have time for just one question. And that question was, how many more gauges, I'm just kind of paraphrasing, how many more gauges would be necessary to get better mapping for Harris County?
So, I mean, if you have looked into my presentation, I said, around 177 gauge for mapping the 1,200 miles of channel. So, I mean, we don't put gauges just as we want to make the number more, So there are many reasons why we're putting those gauges. And I think in the nation, we have the most dense gauge network in the United States. So when we add a gauge, we see, okay, do we need this information here? Is it enough? We are covering. So right now, we have, for the time being, to map the 1,200, we have enough gauges. In future, we are looking to extend, because as I said in my presentation, we have 2,500 miles of channel. So in future, we are actually expanding it. So we will cover, probably in future, you will see 2,500 miles in future. But as we are speaking, we are also doing flood forecasting. So we are, in future, you will see, and we are using HEC-RTS to do the flood forecasting. So depending on, and also some of the gauges, we are measuring flow. So depending on our need, depending on how useful it is, because maintaining a gauge is also involves cost, So if the information is necessary for doing our future, there are also some regional detention pond that we have. We want to know how the pond, actually the regional detention basin, is operating during an event. So depending on that, we might actually add more gauges just to better understand during an event how it is responding. So we add gauges depend on whether we need the information, whether it will help us, whether it will provide us more information. So based on that, we do that. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ataul. Now we're going to have our last speaker of Session JI, Local Flood Warning Systems, sponsored by LB Foster, Our speaker is Dean Goodison. He is a certified flood manager with Atkins, and he is a division manager for Atkins. The title of his presentation is Getting Ahead of the Storm, Densifying North Carolina's Stream Gauge Network. Take it away, Dean.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's session. I wish I could be given this presentation in person, but times have changed, and so I'll look forward to seeing you all in person next year when you come to Raleigh. Today's presentation is titled Getting Ahead of the Storm, Densifying North Carolina Stream Gauge Network. Just a quick outline, I'm going to talk through the purpose and need. I'll move into gauge evolution and talk about some of the variety of gauges over the decades. I'll get into the pilot project that we conducted for our client, North Carolina Emergency Management, specifically the floodplain mapping program, and then finally some takeaways. First of all, the importance of the purpose and need, the importance of FIMAN. FIMAN, some of you may know, it's known as Flood Inundation Mapping and Alert Network. It is a real-time decision support system that helps emergency managers for evacuations, helps the DOT for advanced road closures, detouring. It's a really powerful tool that's used particularly during major events. But it's also a critical tool that's used for pre- and post-disaster planning. Though it doesn't do any predictive analysis, it does have scenario modeling built in to help our disaster mitigation planners get ready for major events. Typical coverage. So the basic input for FIMAN is stream gauge data. That it takes that information and is able to translate that into flooding boundaries, and which is what makes it so powerful. So the basic input is stream gauges. As you can see on the screen here, here's a typical stream gauge, that little green dot that you see over that roadway. It has a coverage area upstream of a few miles and downstream of a few miles. Generously, each stream gauge can cover about 10 miles. Typically, it's even less than that, but for sake of this presentation, we're going to assume that these gauges can cover about 10 miles each. 40,000 miles of major streams in North Carolina. And we have currently, as you can see here, this is sort of a spattering of the gauges throughout the state. There's currently over 350 active gauges throughout the state on these major streams. So herein lies the problem. 40,000 miles of major streams, 350 gauges translating to about only 3,500 miles of gauge coverage. So we really only have we have less than 10% coverage throughout the state. So FIMAN is powerful as it is limited in the fact that there's so many blind spots throughout. So North Carolina, wanted to, really has a desire to densify its gauge network. Traditional costed gauges are very expensive, and so it's kind of been a slow build out. But times have changed, technology has changed, and there are a lot of low-cost sensors out there that really could be a game changer to densify the stream gauge network and therefore improve the reach of the FIMAN system. Gauge evolution. What we've really seen over the last, many decades since gauges were installed is really transfer from low-tech, high-cost to now what we're seeing, an acceleration towards the high-tech and low-cost. Let's go right back to the beginning. Gauges, in some of these, all these gauges that I'll talk about all still exist. But from a very simple staff gauge, we still see these out on our bridge piers. It's nothing more than a ruler on the side of a bridge pier that just you can view the water level against that gauge. The pros of that, they're very reliable, they're accurate, and they're extremely inexpensive. The cons are that they're really not tied to any elevation. It requires field personnel to be physically present to understand what the water level is at. Getting a little more sophisticated, we move on to the float and wire. This is a bit more robust system. It is either a facility located directly over the water source or offline, but connected to the water source by way of intakes. Those intakes just allow the water level to equalize in the facility and with the water surface elevation of concern. And then simple floats are used to adjust to the water surface elevation, and that gets translated into a water level elevation. Very complex, very mechanical type of system. So the pros are that it's very accurate. The cons are that it's very expensive to acquire and maintain. Those intakes oftentimes get clogged, which is why they usually have more than one. But nevertheless, high maintenance associated with this type of gauge. Now we're getting a little more, and by the way, the first 4 gauges that I'm going to talk about here, giving you an overview for, are what we call contact sensors, or contact gauges. And so there's really 2 classes of gauges, contact gauges and non-contact. So right now we're in the 3rd one, which is a pressure sensor in the class of a contact gauge. Pressure sensor is, taking you back to your fluid dynamics class in college, operates off the principle of hydrostatic pressure. Pressure equals gamma times H. So the sensor senses the pressure, and if you know the unit weight of the fluid that you're in, you can quickly translate that into a water surface elevation. These are very reliable, accurate gauges. The data is also digital, and so can be downloaded directly at the source, or if outfitted with over-the-air communications, the data can be sent back to a control center elsewhere. The cons of that, they're relatively expensive and to acquire and also to maintain. Again, you're putting this right in the water source, and so there's maintenance issues associated with that. Next one is a bubbler, not one that we commonly see, but essentially works by a gas is infused into the dip tube there, and it's pressurized against the hydrostatic pressure, and that then they're able to translate that into a water level reading. These gauges are reliable, they're accurate, and again, this can be the data can be digital, and so it can be downloadable or transferred if so outfitted with communications to be sent back to a command center. The cons are that it's relatively expensive to acquire and maintain. All right, so then moving on to the different class, now we're into the non-contact sensors. Now we're getting into the higher technology that's really accelerated over the last 10 years. First one being a radar sensor. Very reliable, very accurate. All digital data can be downloaded and sent over the air, and relatively speaking, low maintenance. Because these are not contact sensors, this is not a contact sensor, it's not put directly in the source, and so therefore doesn't have a lot of the issues associated with the contact sensor. One of the cons is that they are relatively expensive to acquire. Last one I want to mention, and this is the one that was used in the pilot study for North Carolina emergency management, is an ultrasonic or sonic sensor. Very accurate. Digital data can be downloaded and sent over the air. Very low maintenance, and also very low cost. The cons that we discovered with this are that the sensors are they're sensitive to various environmental conditions. And so you do get a little bit of noise in the data. That noise is essentially inconsequential if you really to zoom into the noise that appears from time to time. We're talking really, within a half an inch, which is inconsequential to what is needed for Feynman. Okay. So comparing contact gauges versus non-contact gauges. The contact gauges have a large footprint. Oftentimes require heavy excavation. Could involve environmental permitting, depending on the impacts. Communication, analog to digital. That has to be converted. High upfront capital costs and high operations and maintenance cost. Compare that to your non-contact gauges. Very small footprint, ease of construction, built-in digital. Low upfront capital cost and also low operations and maintenance. These numbers here, these are not gospel. These are very rough numbers, but your contact gauges, you're going to be spending more than $20,000, and I've heard numbers all over the map, from a little over $20,000 to upwards of $100,000. It really just all depends. But nevertheless, for sake of this presentation, it's safe to assume that your contact gauges are in excess of $20,000. Your non-contact gauges are going to be less than $5,000. Now I'm going to move on to talk specifically about this pilot project that we conducted for our client, where we installed low-cost gauges. Up on the screen should be a map showing 15 gauge sites. We were working in the eastern portion of North Carolina. All but I think 3 were really in the coastal plains. Several, as you can see, they're also on the outer banks of North Carolina. So we were scattered throughout. We were paired up with a new startup company, Greenstream Technologies, Inc. They had just come out with a new sonic sensor. They were at the time selling these for off the shelf about $500 for the gauge itself. So the state was very interested in understanding if these were, what the capabilities were, how accurate they were, etc. And so in our pilot project, we were paired up with Greenstream to install these devices. Sensor type is ultrasonic. It collects information such as depth to water surface, battery percentage, signal strength, and temperature. It's got a maximum range of 25 feet. It does over-the-air communication, which is great for transmitting the data back to a command center, but also they're able to do things like reboot the software remotely. They can push software updates remotely and do debugging, also do algorithm adjustments. So that having that the over-the-air communication is important. Avoids a number of trips to the field to do simple functions. It's a cloud-based platform with dashboards and alerts. So the data can be pushed out to your cell phone, to maintenance personnel, emergency managers. They can view the water level at any time. The types of settings, I mentioned most of these were in the coastal plains. We did have some riverine settings in the Piedmont section, but rivers and streams. We also had some coastal tidal zone areas, as you can see in the picture in the middle. And believe it or not, we even had, I think, 2 dry land applications located out in the Outer Banks area. So getting ready for the project, first thing we had to plan this thing out well in advance. So we did a field trip, spent a couple of days traveling to each of the sites, documenting the conditions to understand the site constraints, take a look at safety considerations, knowing that when we come back we're going to have to install these things. looking at our options there. And in fact, on a couple of occasions, we came back with safety concerns, so much that the state decided to move the location of 2 of them to different locations, just because we couldn't, without heavy traffic control, wouldn't have been able to do the installation safely. Also took a look at trying to envision what the mounting options would be for each of the sites, and then finally optimized our location for operations and maintenance considerations. After doing that download, we tried to design a mount that would work, ideally would work for at all sites. This design also had to be coordinated and approved by North Carolina Department of Transportation, since most of these, most if not all of them, were on NCDOT property. So, to try to make, so we try to design a universal system that could be mounted on each one. Based on some of the feedback from DOT and what they would allow and what they would not allow, we had to modify the design in some cases. So in the end, we ended up with 3 different mounting types. We had a bridge mount, which you can see right there. It was a typical bridge mount. We also had a bridge pedestrian rail mount. This was in areas where the DOT would not allow drilling into the core slab of the bridge. And then we had finally a pole mount. And that was the last one. By and large, they really all followed the same basic design. I don't really have a pointer here, but the pole assembly itself was the same. It was how it mounted to the bridge that had to be adapted to meet the DOT criteria. And I've got a couple pictures from the actual installations itself. Once we had everything was was designed and mostly pre-assembled in my garage, and then we spent 2 days doing all of the installations at the 15 sites. What you see here is kind of difficult with the background, but you can see this is a bridge mount assembly. The picture to the right is what we went through to install it. So in some cases we had to hang off the side of a bridge. We didn't have to do that for every single case, but really was a very simple and quick operation. On average, we installed 15 gauges in 2 days, 2 very long days. On average, we were between 30 and 45 minutes from the time that we pulled up to the site, got out, did the installation, and were driving off site. Some sites were a little bit longer than others, took a little bit longer than others, but on average between 30 and 45 minutes per site. So it was a very quick operation. Things really went without a hitch, and all that pre-planning is really what made it successful. As you can see, my partner there on the right is putting on the electronics. Picture on the left was me getting the assembly ready, and while I was doing that, he was getting things wired up. And by the time that we got the assembly mounted, Orion would simply walk up, strap these to the pole, orient the solar panel in the direction that was optimum for solar, and then do a reboot, and literally within just 30 seconds we were sending data to the cloud. It's another one of those applications, bridge mount, but because the DOT wouldn't allow us to drill into the core slab, we had to attach it to the rail itself. And the next 2 pictures were interesting. These were dry land applications. Doesn't kind of jive with the stream gauge when you don't have water, but these were located in coastal areas along the outer banks. And the reason is water does, during major events like hurricanes, water does breach the dunes and spill over into these high-risk areas. And so the state wanted to test out a couple of these in dry land applications. And so right now they're pointing over sand. But ultimately, if water does breach the dunes, these areas would be inundated, and then the water levels will be picked up by the sensors. So, low-cost gauge advantages. Technological advancements offer a number of advantages leading to significant cost savings. You got multiple modes of communication. All of these at the time were outfitted with 3G communications technology. Since the project were swapped out with 2G technology. After the project was completed, over the last year, they've all been swapped out with 3G communications cards. Very low voltage. These doesn't require much of a battery to keep these things up and running. And that little solar panel, which is, I think it's about 6 inches by 10 inches, is all that is needed to keep that battery charged at all times. The sensor draw is only 2.4 milliamps, which is 1/3 that of the radar. Remote installation, in remote installations where the cell phone signal is weak, we did have that, which was the reason we switched. These were swapped out from 2G to 3G to help improve that. But these systems also can be installed in remote areas without cell signal through the use of mesh networking technology. So those options are available as well. They have a reduced footprint, and they also reduce operations and maintenance fees associated with it. Results and issues identified. All 15 gauges installed were done in 2 days. Pre-planning and pre-assembly was the key. This is quite literally plug-and-play technology. As I said, once we strapped the electronics to the mounting assembly, within 30 seconds to a minute, we were pushing data to the cloud. Pilot project utilized 2G communications initially, as I mentioned this earlier, and since those cards have since been swapped with 3G cards to improve the reliability of the communications. All gauges were surveyed with a professional licensed surveyor and permanent benchmarks established. You might ask me why. These gauges are water level sensors. All they're doing is reporting a distance from the sensor itself down to the water surface elevation. That information needs to be translated into if it's going to work with the Feynman system, it has to be brought into an elevation datum. And so once all this was done, surveyors went behind us and surveyed in the gauge itself, established a permanent benchmark in case we had to change the sensor in the future, or if something happened to it, we could always reestablish the sensor at the proper location, and so that occurred. Reported data was also QC'd against actual field measurements, just to make sure that the measurements we were receiving were accurate. One of the things we learned was solar panels are apparently popular items on the black market. A couple of our gauges back at North Carolina Emergency Management's offices stopped displaying data. We weren't sure what was going on. Upon field inspection, learned that the solar panels were stolen from the apparatus. And so, initially we talked about that this was going to be a possibility, but really this was really more of a pilot project. It was more important that we kept the apparatus reachable from the bridge itself, from the sidewalk, so that no special booms or lifts were necessary to replace the apparatus. Currently, we're working on a mounting assembly that will be more flexible, still allow them to access from the sidewalk, but would put the apparatus out further away and prevent solar panels being stolen or other. Smoothing algorithms are also in the works to eliminate that inconsequential noise that I mentioned earlier. These sensors are sensitive to things like temperature, vibrations on the bridge, and so it does create little noise patterns. They are inconsequential, but the developer is working on algorithms to kind of smooth that data. This is a dashboard that tracks the metrics real time on each of the gauges. This is right on Greenstream's dashboard. You can see you've got water level, gives you the status of the battery voltage, battery percentage, and signal strength. It also detects temperature outside as well. And then what you see in the middle there is, for the main part of the graph, is just water level over time. There's different dashboards that they offer. The pattern you see in the graph in the middle is voltage overlaid the water level. This is clearly a tidally influenced water source, which is why the large wave pattern there. And you're just seeing the voltage as it relates to the water surface elevation. So what are the takeaways? What we learned through this project is that we can get reliable, accurate gauges at a low cost. So from that perspective, the project was a success. I still think there is still a need out there for the more traditional gauges, or a diverse array of gauges. So the low-cost gauge sensors aren't the end-all, but certainly will help the state in their plan to further expand and densify their gauge network. State will need some stakeholders if they continue with this. They have explored and adopted a gauge program to work with other stakeholders to share some of the cost. Stakeholders such as stormwater management agencies, departments of transportation, county-level emergency managers, municipalities, and even the private sector. Partnering with other stakeholders will further expand the network. And this is just the beginning. The Internet of Things continues to facilitate innovation. These low-cost sensors are just another way, another IoT technology that can further innovate the water resources market. We got 5G communications coming online soon. There's mesh networking, so we can reach remote locations. When with more and more of these IoT sensors, can we now be having discussions about predictive analytics in the flood management world through the use of artificial intelligence? And then other, of course, integration of the data from these sensors to other systems like traffic management systems. So I think this is just the beginning, and we're going to see this the flood risk management world evolve in a positive way in the years to come. And with that, I will take any questions you have.
All right. Well, thank you, Dean, for a great presentation. We have time for a couple of questions, and the other questions that we have are going to have to be answered by Dean directly, and he has put his email in the chat so you can ask that question. We do have a question. I'm going to bundle a couple together a little bit here. There was a question about the cost of the sonar equipment and how the gauges were funded.
Yes, so the sonar gauge sensor itself was around $1,000. The cost that I put in the proposal, which was $5,000, was everything else included. The plan, the design, and the permitting associated with it. But the sonar sensor itself was about $1,000. And I'm sorry, what was the other question with cost, Dave?
Now I have another question from Jordan. He says maybe he missed it, but what is the 10-mile limit based on? And he said most regressions would validate 50% of a drainage area. I think I got that right. Or would be validation plus or minus 50%?
So Feynman's unique system, it operates on, it's all pre-populated as part of the mapping efforts that the contractors do, they pre-populate the inundation boundaries. So what happens, the water level sensor takes the reading from the river, associates that to where that stands in terms of recurrence interval, and then pulls out the map from that. What they've discovered is that typically the error kind of goes away within a few miles each direction of the stream gauge. I'm not an expert, so I can't answer any more precisely than that, but all pre-populated modeling efforts.
Well, thank you, Dean. I'd like to thank all three of the speakers that we had today for our presentations, Ranjan, Muttiah, Ataul, Hannan, and Dean Goodison. And again, thank you for attending one of the first virtual ASFPM conferences. And hope to see you all in Raleigh in 2021, May 9th through the 16th. Thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye.